Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's the Ukraine War news update. First part thereof for the 12th of September 2024. Sorry I'm so late today, but my computer was all ready to go. All the tabs, a million tabs lined up, ready to go, and the computer shut down. Failed to even remember what I was doing, remember those tabs. I've had to go and get everything from scratch again, so I've lost about, I don't know, best part of 40 minutes probably. So sorry about that. Anyway. Let's go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to the video below. And there are some pretty staggering numbers on this sheet today. So I'm going to dip into Dell stats that are always linked, remember, in the description to this video every day. And we can look at where these stats sit with regard to the daily averages, so on and so forth. Now, it is worth noting that I think, is on holiday in the US at the moment, so his timing is now different. He used to have these done by the time I do my video because he lives just up the road from me, but he's now some hours behind, so they won't be done probably for another 7 hours, so they will not have today's data on, but we can check out where these stats sit with regard to what we've seen previously. Okay. 1,270 personnel lost. That's a high number. That's near to the 1,300 upper end of the range that I've intuitively signified. 11 tanks is an uptick. That's over the daily average now for tanks, and I think that's significant and probably shows that the Russians are attacking. We know they're doing massive counterattacks in Kursk. We know the Ukrainians are trying to counter-attack in a number of areas there. There's intense fighting between both sides. Both sides will be losing quite a bit of equipment, no doubt. 17 troop-carrying AFVs is about the daily average. 73 artillery systems is phenomenal. 2 multiple launch rocket systems useful there. 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems useful. 1 aircraft. So that's a S-30SM there. MS. Anyway, a jet that we're going to talk about in a minute. 93 vehicles and fuel tanks. Incredibly high number, and 2 pieces of special equipment. So let's look first of all at 93 vehicles on fuel tanks. That's an incredibly high number. Oh, 11th of September, is that? He's got 93 there. This is from yesterday, surely. 12th of September. They didn't have 93 yesterday. I wonder how that one's crept onto today's stats. Unless these are today's stats. He has got today's stats up, even though it's listed as the 11th of September. This is actually the 12th. Interesting. So, okay, that's good then. So 93 is in deep red. Even deeper red, 73 pieces of artillery lost. If we go along to the record, the daily record high is 74. There's only one off the daily record for artillery losses. Incredible there. The mean average has gone up now to 19. So I remember last time I looked at the mean, it was around the 17 mark, creeping up to 18. Now that's 19.3. Indeed, APV average losses are above 18 now, and average tank losses are above 9. So those averages have crept up due to the last, I guess, 6 months of, well, the trajectory of the whole war. But we're certainly seeing those averages, mean averages creep up. Daily record high for artillery pieces is 74. So that's really high there. And the record high for vehicles and fuel tanks is 102. 93 is incredibly close. I mean, you don't normally get above 70 in that category. So 93 is incredible. So some very high numbers in a few of these categories. I don't know what that entails in terms of the artillery systems. They have been systematically trying to degrade Russian artillery for a long time. I don't know why you'd have a massive spike on a particular day, because actually artillery losses have dropped down. If we look at the 7 day, in fact, let's go and do this. Well done, Dell. Thank you for doing all this. Let's look at artillery here. And we have, I hope you could see that my stupid face wasn't in the way. So what I'm going to do is move my face and, oh, I'm flying. Okay, let's look at the, we'll just make this a little bit smaller so it fits. This is artillery. So we have seen a really big increase in artillery. That's what I was talking about. Like, they've systematically been taking out artillery now. It really started happening in the Ukrainian counteroffensive, where they tried to attack, realized that they got absolutely battered by minefields, fortifications, artillery, manpads, etc., and helicopters. And so they took a breather and said, right, we need to hammer Russian artillery. And they started doing that in May last year. And that's why you see that uptick. And it's been broadly carrying on ever since. What's happened recently, I was just saying that we have seen a number of, a couple of weeks now, of the numbers really dropping. And you can see that 7-day rolling average, which is that, I think, the trend line from the dashed orange there, it's not 7-day. It is the just a trend line. It is dipped back down. So to get right back up here for artillery losses is, I think, incredibly important. With 73 today, that's one away from the record. Is bucking that trend of the last few weeks. Really, really low numbers, and I don't quite know why that would be. When we look at special vehicles and fuel tank, vehicles and fuel tanks here. I think this is an important category because as the Russians have lost armoured vehicles and tanks, I think they've been using more and more of these sorts of vehicles. It's a wide category. Don't know what really the remit is for, what's included in this category exactly, but I imagine it's going to be your ATVs, obviously your SUVs, Bucankas, those low Scooby-Doo vans, trucks and so on and so forth. But there will be an element of attack vehicles, motorcycles, for example. We know that there's a massive motorcycle attack in Vuhledar over the last couple of days, and they lost an absolute ton of those motorcycles in one place. So that will skew these numbers upwards, I think. So interesting that you've seen more and more this trend line going up, more and more of these special vehicles used and lost. Not special vehicles, but general vehicles used and lost. Again, dipping down recently, but another massive uptick today. So today's bucking a downtick trend over the last couple of weeks in a number of these categories. Anyway, interesting stuff in my opinion. Well, let's go to Andrew Perpetua's loss list. So this is what he had for yesterday. And we can see that it's a fairly good day for the Ukrainians. Russians losing quite a bit more combat asset losses than the Ukrainians, losing a lot of boats here. So there's evidently been a drop of footage that is just showing boats being destroyed or damaged. Right, let's look at the Ukrainian losses. We have some pretty standard losses. Interestingly, most of these destroyed, hardly any of them damaged. So that's bad news for the Ukrainians, that the ratio of damaged and abandoned to destroyed is really bad here. Pretty much everything in the worst category captured as well. A striker was captured. That's going to hurt them a little bit. So yeah, a few tanks, 4 APCs abandoned, captured or destroyed, an MRAP damaged, all the tanks destroyed, all 3 tanks destroyed, and then a whole host of pickup trucks destroyed, and SUVs and vans and so on and so forth. So nothing of crazy high value there, but all going to be useful for the Ukrainians, of course. When we come to the Russian losses, we see a few bits of surveillance and comms equipment, engineering, vehicle and excavator being destroyed. And then a whole host of boats here hit by drone drop bombs. So that footage is evidently dropped and they're all listed there. 4 of them destroyed, the rest damaged. There's probably, maybe a dozen or so boats there. So some serious boat destruction, almost certainly in the Dnipro River at the bottom end of the delta. The Russians have made some gains there, which I haven't shown on my map because I forget to look down and that neckwards to see if there's any change, because I assume there isn't. But according to Suryat Maps, a pro-Russian mapper, the Russians have made a little gain on one of the islands right on the end of the estuary. Whether that's happened or not, I don't know. So tanks here, we have a number of tanks, track guard and sheds, 5 tanks, 3 of them abandoned or destroyed. IFVs, 100% of these, so about 7 infantry fighting vehicles, 100% destroyed or abandoned, BMP 1s, 2s and 3s, and then a few MTLBs, and then the usual list of trucks, ATVs and civilian vehicles, quite a host of those. So the Russians losing more than the Ukrainians. neither side having massive issues with high value equipment taken out, but of course it's about degradation and attrition over time, and this is not looking good for the Russians, certainly in terms of boats there. And with the boats, I often wonder, it depends whether they're hit when they're moving rather than just being hit moored up, but you often will have quite a few casualties with these boats as well. Yes, so the Ukrainians losing a lot of civilian vehicles there in today's stats as opposed to any other kind of stuff. So I guess that's better to lose those kind of vehicles than anything up here. So I think the Ukrainians having a better day of it than the Russians, according to the stats. Now, the Ukrainians have also taken out a jet. This was initially announced as a kind of, it's disappeared off the radar. So incoming message that Russia might have lost another fighter jet, according to Telegram channel Crimean Wind, with sources in the Ukrainian military, one Russian Su-30SM, so this is the naval iteration of the Su-30, was in the midst of delivering its payload, firing Kh-31P missiles against Ukraine. So Ukraine yesterday morning would supposedly, or might have been in the nighttime, had some raid on a rig somewhere in the Black Sea here, and the Russians hit them with a couple of jets firing these Kh-31P missiles at the rigs. According to them, took out, some say 8, some say 10 Ukrainian boats. Have no idea whether that's true. But one of these jets went missing off the radar, and people were initially saying, it could mean it's been lost. It's not always the case. This does happen, like planes do disappear from the radar, but it's not just possible, it's quite plausible, if not probable, that they are lost full stop when they just disappear off the radar. So one Russian Su-30SM was in the midst of delivering its payload, firing Kh-31P missiles at Ukraine against the Ukrainian troops when it disappeared from the radar. The jet originally came from Krimsk in the Krasnodar region in Russia, says Tendol, though I have also heard it came from Saki Air Base in Crimea. In the meantime, Russian search and rescue helicopters have been dispatched to find the pilot or wreckage. So I think that tells you all you need to know. But what they found was an oil slick in the area where the plane is marked on the map. So that's relatively close to where the rigs would have been. Lost over the Black Sea. Mi-8 and Ka-27 helicopters took part in a search operation near that square. 3-kilometer oil pit was found, oil slick, as well as fragments of the aircraft. They couldn't lift anything. There you go. Some people initially saying it could have been shot down by an F-16. Others saying self-destruction, mechanical fault. But it appears now that it was manpad. So the official line appears to be a manpad. So man-portable air defense system. One of these Stingers, maybe, or similar, on a shoulder, Star Streak, something like that, firing up in the air. Usually a 5-kilometer range, maybe a little bit more depending. And that means that the Russian jets are going to be fairly close to the Ukrainians there. The Ukrainians, I assume it's those, it could be people on the rigs, it could be people in the boats with these manpads. But anyway, the claim is that the manpads took it down. And here, the plane was based in Saki in Crimea, according to that tweet. $50 million worth of multi-role fighter jet being shot down. So that's going to hurt, and obviously losing pilot as well. Another claim of it being manpads, and then the footage has actually come out. The footage is trying to make, I can't quite make head nor tail of the footage really. There's lots of I don't know whether this is drone footage that sees the plane. I don't know what that is. That looks like it could be a rig over there. Then you got a plane flying around, and then you kind of lose sight of it. And then the next time you see it, it looks to be like a flaming ball, sort of flying through the air or something like that. Just really not sure what this tells us 100%. But this is supposedly, so I don't know if that there is a plane. I mean, it looks like a boat going through the sea. But anyway, that could be the plane. It could be the plane on fire. Who knows? And then you see this flaming, I presume that's a flaming ball or a plane that's in a bit of trouble. And then that's the end. Right. So there's a lot of assumptions you're going to make of that. But that's the evidence they've given. And they have listed it on the on the daily figures have we seen. So that's usually a good indication that there's enough evidence to suggest that was definitely shot down. The Russians were looking for it, etc., etc. I think 100% that plane was lost. So that's good for the Ukrainians there. Okay, moving on. Ukrainian defense forces struck 2 Russian air defense systems near the towns of Ukrainska and Pokrovska, so that's broadly in the same kind of area. A Buk missile system was hit in the Orhiv direction near Ukrainska. Actually, that could be a different Ukrainska. There's a few of these towns, so that could be down on the southern front line. And a Zu-23-2, so that's an anti-aircraft gun that's less valuable near Pokrovsk, taken out. So that's the claims from the Ukrainians, and that could be YBC-2 anti-aircraft warfare systems on the list today. Right, let's look at a couple of bits of drone imagery. Now, this is apparently the Russians doing. I said to you exactly this, that the Russians will be doing their own thermite thing very soon. So the Ukrainians need to hammer home that advantage and make sure that they use these thermite dropping drones as much as bloody possible until the Russians do that. And actually the Russians have been super quick and apparently are onto it, and they are doing it themselves. And that is an example of them doing it. It doesn't look to be as destructive. So I don't know if they haven't quite perfected it yet. As in, when it falls down, it doesn't seem to be causing the kind of long lines of fire that the Ukrainian ones have done. So they could still be in the process of perfecting that, but it's definitely a big worry if the Russians are doing that already. Okay, then there's another video. Again, this is all about drone evolution and drone usage. Here we have a Ukrainian UGV, so there's an unmanned ground vehicle driving into, so just to let you know, you've got a railway going across here, and you've got a tunnel underneath the railway with two sides there. So one of these kind of fairly short tunnels. It's almost like a culvert type thing. That's probably the wrong word, but anyway, it drives under there, and then you get a big old explosion. And I don't know whether there were people under there, whether there's equipment under there, or whether this was a case of, so there's the UGV driving under there, and then big old explosion there. Doesn't like me showing that. Anyway, there you get it. It says it's a Russian hideout from the inside. It probably is. It's a very useful place to just drop some, maybe a cache of ammunition. Maybe get your troops to hide out there, billet down for the night, and you've got a UGV going in and proving its worth there by exploding, but also might well have been taken out railway as well. So that could be a really significant explosion there, hit by the Ukrainians. I don't know though. Okay, destruction of a Russian Orlan 30. Sorry, so this is a reconnaissance drone. Why I'm showing you this picture is it gives you a great silhouette of the drone that's hitting it. So sometimes I'm wondering, what are these drones looking like? Do they have one? Or what I want to know is, because there've been all these FPV on reconnaissance drone hits that we've seen. So there was a claim the other day of 49 of these reconnaissance drones or similar, sometimes Lancets, but mainly reconnaissance drones, Zala, Supercam, Orlan 10s and Orlan 30s, being hit by these potentially bespoke FPV drones. But I wonder whether they're just FPV drones that ram into these, no explosives on board, just ram into them and then cause them to fall out the sky. So they're not really bespoke, they're just FPV drones that you're flinging around the sky, hunting out these reconnaissance drones. Or do they have explosives on board? Because they always cut out when they hit, right? You never know whether they explode in the sky, but I can't tell from that whether it's got an explosive on board. It's certainly got a big old something that to me looks like it's got an explosive on board, because there's a big block there. And if you were wanting an FPV drone doesn't look like that normally. It's quite sleek. So to me, that has got an explosive on board, but I don't know. You guys probably know better than me. So I thought that was a really good catch on. Obviously, the sun's behind it. It just gives you a great view of the FPV drone itself as it's going into the reconnaissance drone. Right, Then yesterday, there was a freight train that was derailed as a result of an explosion on the railway tracks of Belgorod region. I did report this. The explosion occurred on the Volnokonovka-Novi Oskol section. As somebody said, I see no signs of an explosion. However, this is what was claimed. Now, the question was whether it was rail sabotage or not. Apparently, so Euromaidan press says Russian freight train derailed after explosion on the railway tracks in Belgorod. Russian Telegram channel Baza says the explosion occurred on the Volnokonovka Novi Oskol route on the evening of 10th September. The freight train travelling from Bataysk to Stary Oskol hit an explosive device placed under the tracks, causing a locomotive and around 10 empty cars out of 58 to derail. The Telegram channel Astra reported that Belgorod governor Gladkovs confirmed the derailment. It took place in the Novooskolsky district, involving the locomotive and several empty wagons. No injuries were reported. The passenger trains were rerouted. Later, Russia's Southeastern Railway confirmed that 11 wagons and the locomotive derailed, citing illegal interference with transport operations as a cause. Russia's military logistics heavily relies on the railway network. The damaged line is used to supply Russian troops in Russian southern Belgorod Oblast. And unfortunately, one of the tweets I had sorted was an admission by the Ukrainians that they did it. So this was, I think it was a Ukrainian GUR. Is it Belgorod derail? Let's search that. I'm sorry to do this live with you. Partisans derail freight train in Belgorod region. The railway tracks were blown up. That's a claim there, but actually I think it was more the claim from no, that's previously. I don't know. I'd have to look into that, but I think it's Ukrainian saboteurs. I think it was the GUI, which saboteurs, partisans. It's going to be the same sort of people sorting that out from. It'll be the Ukrainian intelligence sorting that out anyway. Either way, but yes. So no, that's from much earlier. Anyway, I'll find that out at some point, but I'm fairly sure the Ukrainians have admitted that today. Right, moving on to distant strikes. So quite a heavy night of attacks again by the Russians into Ukraine, and I've been talking about how consistent these drone attacks are. In fact, good time to go back to where are we? So we need to look at cruise missiles, drones. To go back to Dell's stats, and I don't know if we can get a good sense of how consistent these drone attacks have been recently. The steepness of the line tells you whether it is a period of heavier, in this case, drone usage, and the steepness of the gradient there, I think, suggests that there has been an uptick. You start looking at, these are record numbers, 120, 115, and we have, I don't know that you can really tell that easily, but the trend line, so this is what you want to look at, actually, you can tell this. So you've got the orange trend line is ticking upwards and upwards, which means that the trend at the moment is towards consistently higher numbers of drones being used than previously. So we get up and down, up and down, up and down. Then as it gets more and more orange as you move here, and you get higher numbers up here, that trend line is going up. So we are seeing more and more Russian Shahid attacks, or more consistent consecutive nights of large-scale drone attacks. And that means that their production at the moment is good enough, that it is doing its job. The Russian production of these, I think, more than the procurement from Iran. I think they're just producing their own ones now. We know that factory has been targeted previously. I assume that's going to be pretty high on the target list again now. We have heard as well over the last few days that China is now providing more and more overt assistance to Ukraine, not just dual-use goods. And my speculation, it is purely my speculation, is that this is going to be one of the areas where they'll be helping out, whether it be with drone engines, microchips, GPS, whatever it is. I think something has changed where the Russians are able to do attacks like this every single night. And I'm going to blame the Chinese. But I could be wrong. Right. Tim White says Ukraine's air defense has had a long night and morning. So I think even when these stats were produced, there were still drones in the air. So there were definitely more drones in this, and there could have been more successful drones as well than is being reported here. So these stats get cut off at some point. So he said, with 4 of Russia's attack drones still in the air at 9 o'clock this morning when these figures were published. So 64 drones were launched, according to these figures, 44 shot down, 4 fell on the ground in Ukraine, another 3 turned back and tried to denazify Russia. So we've heard a lot about this, or not so much of the details, but we keep hearing that drones are being sent back or spoofed back maybe, or for whatever reason they are returning to Russia, Belarus, etc., etc. So something's going on there. And that leaves 9, he says. So potentially 9 drones out of 64 there. That's a fairly good success rate for the Russians, considering we often have 195% interception or electronic warfare success rates. So 9 out of that, what is that? It's going to be something like 17%. I don't know if my maths is good enough there. Something like 17, 18% maybe of drones. No, probably just less than 17%. So it's probably about 16%, 15 of drones there getting 16%. Sorry, shut up, Piers. Right. Just go maths. Got through, and that is not as good as we have seen. So that's a bit of a worry. I don't know too much of the details of the strikes last night, because there were also missile strikes and there were some strikes yesterday as well. So anyway, Tim White adds that Russia also launched missiles into Ukraine, 2 ballistic missiles, 1 Kh-59 or 69 guided missile, 2 Kh-22-32 cruise missiles from 222 bombers. I don't know about the interception rates of those. I presume Ukraine claims that most of the enemy missiles did not reach their targets, pointing again to better electronic warfare. So that is definitely something that's improved both for drones and for missiles, electronic warfare, at least according to the Ukrainian official claims, pinch of salt, etc., etc. A number of missiles and drones do seem to be taken out by electronic warfare. However, there was quite a bit of damage. Some of it was done by regular shelling and close range, probably multiple launch rockets, etc., etc. In Sumy last night, Russia launched several strikes on the infrastructure of Konotop, including a hit on a residential area in the city centre. According to the mayor, the city lost its power and there are initial reports of casualties. Emergency services were working on the scenes. Tim White says the casualty figures from Konotop keep rising. Last night, we knew from doctors of 1 death and 2 injuries. Now 14 are known to have been wounded when attack drones hit an apartment block and an energy facility. So I would assume the apartment blocks were near the energy facilities. I doubt, again, the Russians are going to be throwing drones into apartment blocks, but then they have done that before as well. I say all the time, somebody had a go at me for double standards, because I say the Ukrainians have scarce resources and they are not going to be aiming at apartment blocks on purpose, right? But I can't say that for the Russians, and the reason I can't say the same for the Russians is not double standards. It's that it's very clearly appeared from the beginning of this war onwards that the Russians have no problem with hitting residential civilian infrastructure. And indeed, they appear to have done that purposefully a number of times. They have had an approach to trying to break the spirit of the Ukrainians throughout this war, so that they do that. And I criticize them for doing that, not so much from the moral calculation point of view, which is terrible, right? Morally terrible. But actually, from a military point of view, we know from the Blitz that didn't really work. It usually unifies the population. And that actually they wasted an awful lot of munitions in the early part of the war aiming at civilian infrastructure and not trying to hit military infrastructure and other forms, maybe even energy infrastructure early on in the war. And I just think that was a bad use of their ordnance. So when it comes to them hitting civilian infrastructure now, you've got the options of, 1, they did it on purpose. There's form for that, so it's plausible. 2, they didn't do it on purpose, but they're trying to hit something near, and it was an error or circle error probable. So, the ordnance doesn't always hit where you want it to hit. 3, it happened because of electronic warfare sending it off course. So not just it's not an accurate enough missile or something went wrong with a missile or drone, but actually electronic warfare sent it into an apartment block. And the 4th option is interception sends it into an apartment block. So there are 4 different, and there is also the element that the Russians don't really care either way. That's a layer to add on to that too. So whatever the reason is, you get ordnance flying into civilian infrastructure, and it wouldn't happen had the Russians not invaded. So for both sides, like for that happening with Ukraine firing stuff into Russia, and for Russia firing it into Ukraine, all you need to know is that neither of them would happen had the Russians not invaded. So when you're looking at the ultimate responsibility for any of this happening, it's the Russians. It's the Russians' fault, right? So I'm not trying to do double standards. I'm not trying to get the Ukrainians off the hook. I'm trying to look at exactly what we know from the form of this war and from the scarcity of resources for the Ukrainians compared to the Russians. Russians do have a scarcity now. At the beginning of the war, they didn't have so much of a scarcity. So they were just flinging ordnance into Ukraine with wild abandon, in some cases at least. Okay, so yeah, in the town of Sumy, this town is 50 miles from the Russian border, so fairly close there. Okay, Russian shelling of the city of Konstantinivka in Donetsk Oblast has killed 3 civilians. So that's one of those places. You've got Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, just behind that Konstantinivka. And then you've got Druzhkivka, you've got Slovyansk and Kramatorsk. All those places get a bit of a hammering on a routine basis. You've got another Konstantinivka further down to the south, just near Novomikhailivka, so north of Vuhledar, which is also getting a hammering, and that's in Donetsk Oblast. So according to the Ukrainian military, Russian troops will try to storm Konstantinivka because it opens the doors to Vuhledar. So this is the one further down south, north of Vuhledar, that is under pressure at the moment. It is being absolutely hammered, that Konstantinivka. But both of them are under pressure. First photos coming out from Russia's ballistic missile attack on Dnipropetrovsk. So I presume this is the big city of Dnipro, though authorities still refuse full access or release of media under martial law. A 22-year-old man and woman aged 32 were injured, as well as a 38-year-old man who died when a business was struck. So again, you've got commercial infrastructure being destroyed here. Is that purposeful? Is it kind of indiscriminate? So we're just going to throw stuff at, I don't really care where it goes. We're not aiming for anything. We're just throwing it into Dnipropetrovsk. Is another option to add to the ones I talked about earlier. Okay, more problems on the front line in Free Donetsk. So this is a part of Donetsk that's not occupied. Evidence that Russia has destroyed the Dnipropetrovsky bridge between Pokrovsk and Mironohrad. So these are the 2 larger settlements near to the front line in the Pokrovsk region. So obviously Pokrovsk city itself, a massive bridge there has been taken out by the Russians. This is what they do to liberate cities. They cripple them and then crush them and rubblize them. That's liberation. That's what freedom looks like in Russia. What else has happened? Early this evening, Ukrainian forces successfully struck a Russian ammunition dump outside of Mariupol. So large-scale fires, evacuation of the town there. Multiple large fires and the secondary explosions can be seen from nearby as the dump cooked off. Successful strike by the Ukrainians in the Mariupol area. What else? Russian Telegram channels posted yesterday a video showing a long traffic jam of fuel trucks on the Moscow ring road. Why is this important? So reportedly the video was taken at about 6 a.m. yesterday, near the turn to the Moscow oil refinery in the Kapotnya district. On September the 1st, there was a fire there after a drone attack. In the comments, it was assumed that the fuel is being removed from the refinery after the drone attack. So when we see these strikes by Ukraine, we must realize that there are often huge ramifications that are not publicly known or measured. Here is a row. I mean, this is a significant number of fuel trucks. This is really quite serious. What is going on here? Well, it could be that they have an absolute bucket load of fuel that now can't be dealt with. Either it can't be refined if it's a refinery, or it can't be stored, and so they need to get rid of that and get it to somewhere else. And my goodness, that's an absolutely huge line of fuel tankers there. Goodness. So that is the effect of striking these facilities. Really, really interesting that. Right now, this was not right now, obviously, this was at 8:40 this morning, so a few hours ago. Right now, it says Max 24, unknown drones are trying to break into the Olenia airfield in Murmansk. So remember, yesterday there were claims that there were drones attacking the Olenia airfield. That's right near the Finnish border, 1,800 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. 295 MS aircraft are based there, so they're the ones that release these missiles. They don't have to get too close to Ukraine because the missiles have a really long range. In the region, for the second day in a row, the carpet plan is introduced at the two airports, and it's worth noting this, and I can't believe this has happened, right? I said this only the other day to you when we talked about there's two AN2 planes that have crashed recently, and I said the point wasn't AN2 aren't the smallest of planes, right? But I was talking about light planes, and loads of people were like these are much bigger planes than that. Yeah. But my point was, who would want to fly light airplanes around Russia with all these drones that look like light airplanes? You're just signing your own death warrant, surely. Lo and behold, today, Russian Telegram channels report that light aircraft mistaken for drones were shot at yesterday in Russia's Murmansk region. So that's the Murmansk region where they had the carpet plan, and they're saying drones were attacking the Olenia airbase. It might not have been Ukrainian drones at all. It might have been just random light air enthusiasts with their Cessna planes or whatever, having a little trundle in the air and then being shot at by air defences. After cancelling the carpet plan to closure of the sky, two private planes, a Czech Light Sport ATEC 321 Theta NG RA3363G, for those who want to know, and a BRM Aero Bristol NG5 RA2661G, flew to Arkhangelsk from a landing site in the Apatity Municipal District with filed flight plans. So these guys have filed their flight plans. People knew they were there, but someone on the ground with a autocannon or a submachine gun or a small arms bit of, AK-47 or whatever, they're not going to necessarily know that. So minutes after departure, the pilot of the first airplane informed air traffic controllers that something was wrong, and the second board and signalled Mayday. The crew of the Bristol NG5 reported that small arms fire was opened at the aircraft. Really fascinating. I mean, right up north here, just 2,000 kilometers away from Ukraine. Exactly what I predicted. Who knew? Okay, so according to Russian channels, so this is broadly nowish as well. I say nowish, it's 3 hours ago. There is missile R360 Neptune danger in Tarkankut. So that's the western edge of Crimea and Sevastopol in occupied Crimea. Missile danger throughout western Crimea and Sevastopol. So we might see some stuff coming out. In fact, it might already be out. Now, this is massively important as well. This is a really big bit of news. The factory of Osk-Transmash in Omsk, Russia, is on fire. So this factory makes TOS-1A, makes tanks. I don't know if it's a T-90 tank manufacturing facility. I think it refurbishes tanks, certainly. It is, as it says, engaged in refurbishment and repair of tanks. So this is on fire big time in Omsk, right? So loads of footage of this under a lot of, or producing an awful lot of smoke. I've been waiting for this for a long time. This is one of the main facilities. Is it sabotage? Is it a drone? Is it a missile? I don't know. But for this to be on fire is big. This is a military production facility in Russia. This could be a game-changing moment. If this is now, it depends if it could be a mistake. It could be a careless smoker. It could be sabotage. But even that could be opening the door to further sabotage in some of these incredibly important facilities. But if it's a strike, my goodness, we might start seeing some. I was talking with Daniela from Turchny recently, where he was mentioning all these facilities with radial forges to make barrels. if you can start seeing some of these facilities being hit, then Russia is in some serious trouble. I don't know. It's going to be fascinating to see what the details of this are. Right, now going into some other bits and pieces. I'm still up in the top left-hand corner, and I bet that's messing with some of your heads. Anyway, the Russian army has committed at least 137,000 war crimes in Ukraine, according to Zelensky, and this means there should be no fewer sentences there, the president said. So the evidence is still being gathered for these. The Russians are clearly the bad guys. I think we're beyond having to repeat that, but there are still trolls out there. There's still people wavering on the edge. And here's an example of them doing it to themselves again in Glushkovka in the Kursk region. Looters from the Russian army, and I don't understand. Well, anyway, looters from the Russian army have ransacked a wild berries pickup point, so this is their equivalent of Amazon. Ukrainian troops are at least 10 kilometers away from this settlement. Russian channel reports that this is already the 5th recorded case of looting in the Kursk region by either Russian military or local residents. Just, my goodness, they do it to themselves. Right, personal opinion of the Russian counterattack in the Kursk direction from a Ukrainian special unit. So, big counterattack by the Russians. They've taken a bunch of land back. So this Ukrainian says the counteroffensive of the Russians was predictable. It was only a matter of time, or rather time to draw up reserves. Exactly, completely agree with that. At the beginning of the offensive, our troops met almost no resistance. Comrades say that they could actually reach Kursk in a convoy, but there was no accurate data on the location of the enemy forces, and it was possible to fall into a fire ambush, as the Russians fell into at the beginning of the war in 2022. Yes, and stretching the logistic routes in such a case would not be to our advantage. After the approach of the enemy's reserves, the front line stabilized almost everywhere. The enemy pulled up enough ammo and equipment and pushed our forces in some areas. As the enemy draws up new reserves, the pressure on our positions will increase. The same applies to the cross direction, including Seledovich. So this is back in the Donetsk area where the Russians are pushing against the Ukrainians. Remember the pace at which the enemy advanced just a few weeks ago. Now we have in turn pulled up the reserves. The enemy in this direction has minimal advances, if any. Thus, everything again comes down to the number of reserves of personnel, weapons, ammo, and equipment. Unfortunately, the enemy has an advantage in all indicators, but we are also not standing still. In addition, a decision is expected to authorize the firing of the Russian territory by missiles of partners. More on that in my next video, which means that that the enemy's rear will be on fire along with critical infrastructure and personnel. So that is all about the reserves. Who has more reserves? And worryingly, Russia do. George Barros says from the Institute for the Study of War, Russian forces counterattacked the Ukrainian salient in Kursk. The size, scale and potential prospects of the Russian counterattacks are unclear, and the situation remains fluid as Ukrainian forces reportedly counterattacked the Russian counterattack. So there's counterattacking of the counterattack. What else can be said? The ISW says geolocated footage. Basically, I'll go through this in my mapping update. Let's go through some of the stuff at the end, not just kind of geolocations. Ukrainian forces reportedly began new attacks against the Russian counterattack west of Snagost and throughout the Ukrainian salient in Kursk. So if you take the Kursk salient here, and you've got the same river that goes along towards the left here, you've got the Russians attacking in this area, taking some land up north here at Snagost, which is south of Koronovo. The Ukrainians are supposedly attacking the Russians below here from the border to try to flank them as they attack the Ukrainians who are inside Russia up here. So the Russians are pushing in this direction. Ukrainians might well be attacking them in the rear, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so a Ukrainian brigade reportedly operating in Kursk reported on the 11th that Ukrainian forces began attacking Russian forces' flank west of Snagost after the initial counterattack into Snagost. So that's Snagost, I think. So here is where the Ukrainians are attacking. Russian mill bloggers also claimed that Ukrainian forces are conducting small mechanized cross-border assaults. So I talked about all of this last night in my frontline update. So they're attacking in a number of places. They're attacking across the border here to stop the Russians taking this land back, and also up here the Ukrainians are attacking across the border, also down in the Belgorod Oblast by the Kharkiv offensive areas. So the Ukrainians might be trying to get the Russians to be distracted. So yeah, cross-border assaults in the Glushkovko region, that's here, near Medvedji, southwest of Snagost, and in another unspecified area along the international border. So anyway, lots of stuff going on there. I'll keep you updated. Russian servicemen from Pokrovsk direction report on the duality among the Russian offensive force. Some brigades are equipped by volunteers with described as well-organized modern military units, and you can check out this. I'm not going to read it to you, but it's on the screen. Others are sent to assault with minimal artillery support, no armor or aviation, and are heavily targeted by Ukrainian drones. So there is a real juxtaposition with regard to the preparation and equipment and how well sort of tooled up, loaded up these troops are. So some are really well trained, really well equipped, and are going about their business, and others are sent in to these kind of meat wave assaults without any support, artillery support, equipment, and probably a lack of training as well. It's just a complete mix of both ends of the spectrum. Now, Russians have apparently cut off gas and water supplies to Pokrovsk, according to the governor of that absolutely hammered town there. So that's worth knowing. Now, finally, I'm going to leave you. I did this yesterday. So I was talking about the Russian bot that just said, and Emma.Mills, the Russian bot here, has been provoked with those, like, so if you go on to this one, you look below. So this is spread by Sven-Erik Volberg. You've got another example of them being prompted with some coding to then come up with complete nonsense. So it's clearly a Russian bot, and it has these automated responses of coding that don't make any sense. Well, not to me anyway. And anyway, it was just the writing here is I am England and I am support Russia, which I have now, I'm trying to start this new thing. But hopefully people understand the original thing, because otherwise it looks like I'm just illiterate. I am Britain and I am support Ukraine. No capitalisation of Ukraine, capital A and all caps for I am Britain. Anyway, turns out that loads of you were doing this yesterday in my thread. I am Texas and I am support Ukraine. I am Pluto and I am support Ukraine. I am Virginia and I am support Ukraine. I am Nebraska. I am Oregon. I am Sweden. I am Canadian. I just love it. I am North Carolina and I am support Ukraine. I just absolutely love it. It makes me, I don't know why it makes you laugh, but it does. So it's brilliant. I am Australia and I am support Ukraine. Brilliant stuff. Keep it going, guys. Get on Twitter and do that just for shits and giggles. Anyway, take care, everybody. Speak soon. Sorry, it's been a long one. Take care. And there's going to be a huge geopolitical video next.